On this episode, I'll take a way too early look at BYU football in 2025. Positions, players to watch, all right here on the Cougar Tracks podcast.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Mitch.
Thank you, ESPN.
Thanks, Kalani.
We love your Cougars.
Welcome on in, Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Way too early look. Man, I love the way too early action. You know me. I love those way too early college football lists. It's one of my favorite times of the year because there's so much optimism, so much, endless optimism. Even in spring and summer, the optimism isn't as high because sometimes you get a little banged up, you have a few losses to the portal. This time of the year, I think there's always that belief, that hope that's endless for any team. And for BYU football heading into 2025, that hope is maybe greater than many years that we've seen in BYU football as we dive into a way too early look at BYU football in 2025. You can follow me on X, Instagram, at Mitch_Harper. Follow KSL Sports as well, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the social medias. Download the KSL Sports app too. You can get push notifications of all my BYU stories that I'm pushing out on KSLSports.com. BYU riding high in football after an 11-2 season in 2024. Unexpected. I said on this show going into the year that I thought they'd get to a bowl game, but no one envisioned 11-2. No one saw that coming, and it was an incredible year for this BYU football team. The challenge now in front of them is to get better because so many in the media are going to anoint them. So many are going to predict that they're going to finish high in the Big 12 standings in 2025. They're no longer going to be slept on. They're going to be a big story in the Big 12 conference next year. And I think for some polls, they might even be a preseason top 25 team. They should be. I thought it was insane that there were some way too early top 25s that didn't have BYU included. I'm thinking, what else do you need to see from them to say that they're a top 25 team? Like, who did BYU lose from this team that just hammered Colorado, a media darling, and a really good football team, I might add, too? Colorado's a good team. Hammered that squad, fully loaded with Shedeur and Travis Hunter. BYU only lost 2 games, one of which was to a playoff team. The other was by 4 points or 3 points. What else do they need to do to be viewed in that regard? Maybe that's the chip they need. Maybe that's what the extra motivation that's needed for BYU. But still, I'm not of the belief that you just always have to be the underdog. I love BYU football and BYU basketball as a pesky underdog. It's always a good spot to be in. Look what happened in the Alamo Bowl. BYU being overlooked, that's always good spots. The challenge sometimes for BYU athletics is when you're expected to perform, how do you fare? Can you get over the hump? Can you take it to the next level and get to the heights that you're striving for as a program? I think having those heightened expectations is a good thing, though, because that means you're winning. And you want to be a winning program, and BYU clearly was that in 2024. They'll look to take it to greater heights in 2025. When I talked to Tom Holmoe down in San Antonio, BYU athletic director at the Alamo Bowl, I asked him, and you can listen to the full interview on Cougar Sports Saturday podcast feed, is next year the expectation Big 12 championship or bust? He shied away from that commentary, but did add he wants to see them get better. And getting better from 7-2 in Big 12 play, being left out of the Big 12 championship game due to a tiebreaker, the only way to get better from that, well, to me, is to get to the Big 12 championship game. The good thing is for BYU is that on paper, this team looks like a group that has that potential to do that. Easier said than done. And we'll see how the schedule lays out and the schematics of that. That's always a big piece to any sort of championship run. But personnel-wise, this has the makings to be the best, most talented BYU football team under Kalani Sitake. And I thought last year's team, 2024, was the deepest. And I think this year could even be deeper in 2025. So here's some thoughts overall on 2025's team. What's going to be interesting is the 105 roster. And we don't know yet when that exactly has to be trimmed down to 105. That's going to be a big question to me. When does that have to be official? But by the looks of it, if you're just forecasting for 2025 solely, for what it's going to look like in the fall, they're pretty close to that 105 right now. They've got options, and that's also focusing on, if some guys come back, if some players don't take advantage of the waiver from the JC blanket waiver, that frees up some spots as well. But if you get some of those guys back, you're pretty close to that 105 spot. And then you have a little bit of wiggle room, too, that if they don't, you can promote some of those players that you maybe envision as gray shirts getting one of those spots, or you go into the portal again. They've got the flexibility, and I think that's one of the nice things about where BYU stands going into winter conditioning right now, spring football, and all the phases of the offseason. They're in a good spot with roster construction, and I think that BYU's done a really nice job. The transfer portal, I think, has been very beneficial and been a net gain for BYU football. The Cougars have not lost much. Their gains have been bigger than the losses. Carson Ryan comes in from Utah, tight end. Offensive tackle Andrew Gentry from Michigan. Kyle Safarisic from Southern Utah. Tausili Akana, defensive end from Texas. Anisi Purcell from Southern Utah. Keanu Tanavasa. Max Alford from Utah State. Garrison Grimes, a long snapper from Baylor. BYU has got guys that have proven themselves at the college level. In some cases, Akana's more still projection-based. But the common thread with all of them is that there was a previous relationship with BYU coaches before transferring in. And that's going to be critical moving forward as BYU builds up these rosters. Transfer portal guys, I don't think we're ever going to see the 2023 cycle again where BYU had 30-plus guys. And they kind of needed to do that because they needed to get a quick jolt of talent upgrade. And they did that. I mean, it created a transition where you had a losing year, but 2024, you had an 11-win campaign. You ultimately got what you desired by making those moves in the portal, but you're never going to see that big of a wave of portal guys and acquisitions again, in my opinion, for BYU. It's going to be, 7 to 10 guys maximum, and with the 105-man roster, it doesn't allow for 30-plus transfer portal guys to begin with. I mean, if you're going 30-plus in the portal in a given cycle, that's a third of your roster. And within that 30, probably only, 10 are going to be and that's on the high end, probably starters, maybe 15 too deep. That's a slippery slope. So BYU's in a good spot. And I think that's noteworthy, too, when you're talking about building out the roster construction, heading into year 3 in the Big 12. BYU has established the type of program that Kalani Sitake envisions is best served for BYU football under his watch. He's got the coaching staff in place that he wants, that's well-resourced. Still can get better, I think, from the resources standpoint. Continue to take it to a higher regard from I mean, because there's always a desire to have more. You've done a nice job with some players with NIL and acquisition, but you can always do more. You never stand pat and say, oh, we've arrived and the resources are great, and just kick your feet back and say all is well. Like, no, you want to continue to keep doing more and keep pumping in money, because I think BYU as a university right now should sense the opportunities that are in front of them. You think about, since being in the Big 12, the springboard, the platform that has provided to BYU athletics, bigger than anything else, next to the national championship. I mean, this has been massive, where you're getting, AJ DeBansa, number one basketball recruit. In football, you're winning at a high level. You're in the national conversation, even though everyone wanted to discredit you and say you're a fraud. Still, you were in the conversation. Should have been more in the conversation late in the season, but I also understand, because you lost 2 games. I get it. I'm not one of those people that says, oh, they should have been in the playoff. I'm fine with how it ended up. But understanding that the playoff is there, the path to getting into that field being so close, keep throwing money at this thing and keep investing like never before, because BYU athletics, spreads the brand of BYU to markets, to people that would have never thought of BYU, the LDS Church, ever before. And I just think there's a real opportunity here to kick this thing into overdrive and take it to greater heights. 11-2 was great. Can you get to the Big 12 title? Can you go win that thing and win a Big 12 championship? That was missing from the 2024 team. It's hard to say you're one of the great teams, one of the elite BYU teams. You're a great team, but one of the elite BYU teams without a championship in the regular season. But you do see, with the way that they're building out the roster, that they sense the moment, the opportunity that's in front of them to take it to a higher level and establish yourself potentially as one of the best programs in a power league. That's still at stake. First 2 years of BYU in the Big 12, year 1, it was Texas. They were outgoing, leaving for the SEC. Next in line was Oklahoma State. They stumbled in year 2 in this new look Big 12. They were terrible. 0-9 this past season. The champs were Arizona State. Can Arizona State follow that up with another big year? They got a transfer from Army to potentially replace Scadaboo. Levitt's back. They bring a ton back defensively. It would seem that Arizona State should be ready to level it up too, but that's always been a program that can't maintain success for the long haul. BYU has maintained success for a long period of time, but it wasn't in a power BCS league back then. It was the WAC, it was the Mountain West. They've never done it in the Big 12 long periods of time. And everyone in this league has shown an ability to win big at least once. But then they fall back to the pack. Arizona, Baylor, Utah, a couple years in the Pac-12. They fall back to the pack. Iowa State. All of these teams, no one can maintain it. If BYU follows up an 11-win season with another 10, 11, 12-win season, you're then talking about BYU football as establishing itself as the go-to program in the Big 12. And that's significant, whether you want to believe the Big 12 is a fraud and not a good league or whatnot, but it's a dang good league. It's very competitive. It's a power conference, well-resourced league. Yes, they're not making the media rights like other leagues, and yes, they're not making maybe the revenue streams like some of the SEC and Big Ten programs, but you get between the lines, these Big 12 teams were very competitive. You saw that between Arizona State and Texas. You can win in this league. And I just get the sense the way that the roster is being built for BYU in 2025, they sense that opportunity. And I think that's exciting because it's not just solely sitting on your hands and saying, oh, we've arrived and let's just keep doing what we're doing. Like I still get this sense from the staff, the players, that there's still more. And I think even though there's going to be heightened expectations next season, man, they still got a lot on the bone left to go reach, to go get. Because you didn't get to the Big 12 championship game. You didn't reach the playoff. And that can still serve as motivation. Like, yes, you got to 11. There's still more to be had. And when you dive into this roster, way too early look at what this roster could look like in 2025. It starts at quarterback, Jake Retzlaff. Jake Retzlaff, he's coming back. You know, I asked him at the Alamo Bowl, why not consider the portal? And I said that, and it wasn't just point blank that, but I asked him that from a standpoint of, you know, just leveraging his brand, his opportunities, maybe get a bigger financial deal with BYU if in the process. Why not? He just said no. No consideration for that. He loves it at BYU. He wants to be at BYU. He's a BYU guy, and he pointed to the relationship him and Aaron Roderick have. Very close. And Aaron Roderick believes that Retzlaff can be one of the best quarterbacks in college football in 2025. If that happens, and Retzlaff does emerge as one of the best QBs in 2025 to the tune of maybe top 5 quarterback, as you heard in the Alamo Bowl broadcast, Dave Pasch said coaches on BYU staff were saying that they see Retzlaff as potentially a top 5 QB in 2025. If he becomes that, BYU's going to win the Big 12. A lot's going to hinge on Retzlaff, and that's a lot to ask for. That's a lot of pressure on him for a guy that's kind of, you know, his starts in being anointed starter was always kind of hanging in the shadows. There wasn't some profound announcement of Jake Retzlaff's our starting QB. You know, BYU could have went to the podium like they did with Jaron Hall and said, Jake Retzlaff, he's our starter. They didn't do that. They waited till game day, let it play out. He kind of struggled against SMU, and people are thinking, oh, what's going to happen here? And then he turned it up, and November he's banged up. And clearly banged up, and Aaron Roderick even told me in San Antonio that, you know, maybe in retrospect they could have played another guy. Jake was really banged up in that Kansas game. He played through it. But if Jake can have, I say, the performances he had against UCF, the performances he had against Kansas State, BYU can win the Big 12. And he maybe could be a top 5 QB in college football if that sort of performances happen. Now, the Alamo Bowl, it's an interesting game to size up for him because there's picks, and you're like, that wasn't pretty. It was kind of the full Jake Retzlaff experience, but some of those throws were brilliant. I mean, the quick decision, decisive, third downs, they're moving the chains. He's getting the ball out quickly. He's making big runs happen on the ground, moving the chains. I just thought Jake, I came away from that Alamo Bowl not too frustrated with Jake. I thought he was fine. It was a performance where you're like, yes, you want to get better. Yes, you need to clean up the mistakes and not have those catastrophic turnovers. But, you know, BYU has a great defense where if they do get put in a pressure cooker, I think they're going to respond. But you also just can't assume that BYU is going to lead the nation in interceptions next year. So you can't always bank on turnover margin being in your favor. You can't always assume that the special teams unit is going to have all these touchdowns. They had 5 this past season. Jake's got to take care of better possessions more at a higher clip and not give up the football. Had 12 interceptions, 20 touchdowns through the air. 5-3 touchdown INT ratio. The year prior was 1-1. So he took a step forward. And I think anyone that doesn't acknowledge that is kidding themselves. Jake did. But can he go to a higher gear? That's going to be the question. And I think what's also a big question is that backup spot. You know, McKay Hillstead, Trayson Bourget, Aaron Roderick in bowl practices gave an endorsement of those guys, that they really like that group. Cole Hagan being the 4th guy right now. Who emerges at number 2? I think what's promising about those guys is that you saw flashes from both in spring and fall camp. Spring and fall for Bourget, fall camp only for Hillstead. Hillstead's got a big arm. watching him in person, most of it was with the third-team offense, third-team defense. So against his peers, you saw a cannon, and you saw a guy that clearly was still learning the playbook, and that was evident last fall camp. Bourguet had some mistakes. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was solid. I thought he was pretty good. But they've started FBS games. And you just wonder who's the next big thing, though. I mean, I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic in BYU's quarterback unit is who's the guy in 2026. I don't know who that is. I think maybe McKay Hillstead. But I don't know. I think that's to be determined. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd say Ryder Lyons. That's a freshman. Yeah, and still, though, you want to roll with the 5-star freshman and clear the deck to let that guy cook and be the guy. So that's going to be a fascinating deal, but the quarterback is going to have a lot on his shoulders in Jake Retzlaff next season. BYU's got to keep him upright, and the offensive line is a position where I say it could be a strength, but I'm also a little bit cautious, a little bit of wait and see. Just want to see how it all comes together. You lose Connor Pay, you lose Braden Keim, and you already got used to life a little bit without Braden Keim, and that was a brilliant performance in that Alamo Bowl. It'd be great if Caleb Etienne returns, takes advantage of that JUCO waiver. I think he should. He's a guy to me that, could be a 4th-round NFL draft pick, but, that's no guarantee. If when you're comparing day 3 NFL draft pick or running it back and extending your football career as long as you can, and in college football you can make money now. You got rev share, you got NIL, you can make money and then continue that paycheck coming in 2026 in the NFL ranks. If I was Etienne, I'd run it back. I mean, but it's not my decision. I don't know all the nuances of their personal dynamics, what go into this, but if I was Etienne, I'd run it back. Offensive line's got talent, though. Isaiah Jota returns. He was banged up at the end of the season. Aaron Roderick said during the year that they view him as a starter at offensive tackle in 2025. They redshirted him in 2024. Austin Leausa returns. Waylon Lapwaho. Waylon Lapwaho, if Caleb Etienne doesn't return, Waylon Lapwaho is your best offensive lineman. He gets no accolades, too. It's kind of interesting. Like, when coaches said coming out of fall camp that Waylon was the offensive MVP in fall camp, people were blown away. Like, what? Waylon Lapwaho? Like, folks, from the moment this guy has stepped foot into college football, he started at Utah State, at BYU. He's been awesome. I remember in 2023, I put out my post-spring depth chart coming out of the 2023 season. You see Waylon in the spring practices, you're like, this dude's a guard. He's going to start. There's not much else you need to see. Like, he's going to be with the first-team offensive line. And people thought, well, this guy from The Athletic is saying on his draft boards that 2024, this transfer from the FCS ranks that BYU added is going to be a draft pick. Like, folks, he's not playing. Waylon's going to be the guy at guard. And he's been a great guard, and I think he's going to be one of the best players on this team next year. Another guy that's going to be a stud, I think you line him up at center and you don't even have any questions about it, it's Bruce Mitchell. He steps in for Connor Pay. You already got film. You've already got data to analyze. Bruce Mitchell's your guy at center. You could play Sonny Mocassini there if you want to, figure out your best 5. I get that, but to me, it's Bruce Mitchell at center. You've also got some other guys in the offensive line. Jake Griffin. I think I'm bullish on the prospects of Jake Griffin, what he could become. He's been a name that we've heard for years. He signed with BYU before the world experienced a pandemic, and he's only a sophomore. That's just how it goes at BYU. Caden Chidester's another one to watch. Weston Jones from Wisconsin. He was banged up in the 2024 season. I like the prospects of Weston Jones potentially as an interior offensive lineman. Andrew Gentry comes in from Michigan. He got banged up, suffered a season-ending injury last year at Michigan. Let's see where he's at health-wise. But Gentry, I think, has got the tools to be a really good player at offensive tackle. And if needed, he could play guard, but I think ideally you want him playing that offensive tackle spot. BYU also adds Kyle Savarksiak from Southern Utah, interior offensive lineman who could play nearly anywhere on the offensive line. Really good offensive lineman. I think he could be a starter too. So they've got talent there. And look, I don't want to say it's a weakness, but I think it's just still kind of seeing how it comes together because Connor Pay and Braden Keim were mainstays. They were rocks of that offensive line. They were studs. And, exceeding that level of production, that's tough to ask from anyone. You've seen signs of it from guys, but over the course of entire seasons, you haven't seen that from guys outside of Wayland. So that's where I kind of just willing to wait and see, but I love the potential. I love the options that they've got. And Joe Brown comes back from an injury. Ethan Thomason comes back from a mission. He's going to have to add weight. I don't expect any offensive lineman coming back from a mission to play. But just, get your body physically ready and add that necessary weight to be ready in 2026 and beyond. But he's a good one. Andrew Williams, Siosua Finau Vete, Justice Enna comes back from an injury. Sione Hingano, Trevin Osler, like him. I think he's a really good athlete. So there's good options. Ignacio Tupo. BYU's got dudes on the offensive line. I think Jackson Nilsson, Trevor Pay, Jeff Lewis as well. I think that's Chad Lewis's son. So BYU's got talent on that O-line. Just kind of bringing it all together there. I think another position that I don't know if it's an area question, but I just think that there's still kind of room to grow and figure out, how these guys perform as mainstays. Cornerback, you lose Jacob Robinson, massive loss. He's in that nickel spot, and he was an absolute stud, one of the greats in BYU football history. And it's interesting, too, because I think Jacob Robinson, when he began his BYU career in 2021, he wasn't the greatest. I think he struggled in stretches. I mean, that 2021 season, there were some tough moments for J-Rob. But he's got better every single week, every single season. And he made plays. And by the end of his career, he's a lockdown corner. I think he's going to be NFL bound. And I think better days are ahead for Jacob Robinson. So losing him is massive. Losing him is big. And Mark Collins, too. Replacing that is difficult. You got to hope that Maury Bamba locks in, takes advantage of that JUCO waiver. He would be huge. I thought he was great in the Alamo Bowl win. Evan Johnson runs it back. And Johnson, you talk about most improved players from 2023 to 2024. He's one of those players to me that falls under that bucket. Evan Johnson, after a couple years, it was kind of like, where's this going? Usually with high school prospects, with how, let's say, I don't want to say impatient, but there's just a greater expectation. Like, you got to perform. And now more than ever with the 105-man rosters, there's no time to just wait for 3.5, 4 years, and then hope that they're a too-deep guy. Like, you got to start showing signs in those first 2 years, or else you might not ever see the field. And Evan Johnson, in year 3 last season, took a big step forward. Because it was kind of on that teetering on the edge. Like, if you don't show it now, you might not ever see the field. And he took a big jump, and he's becoming a playmaker for BYU. You were seeing signs in fall camp, too, of his growth and his development at that cornerback position. Johnson's going to be a really good player. Now, I don't know if he's an all-timer, but I love his speed, and I just think that he's going to be someone, as he continues to, work with Coach G, Coach Guilford, I think he's going to be a really good player. I feel like he's an early starter for 2025 when I forecast ahead. And then if you get back Bamba, he's a starter too. Bamba was one of the MVPs of fall camp before he suffered an injury. You got to remember too, Bamba, I don't think he would have started in replace of Mark Collins, but he would have been the first guy off the bench. And when you moved Jacob Robinson full-time to nickel, you would have instantly seen Maury Bamba and Mark Collins been the top two corners. That's how it would have played out. But that injury kind of put him a little bit behind the eight ball. BYU kind of created their rotation, and it was a work in progress to get him back. And then in the Alamo Bowl, you saw him at full strength again, and it was a reminder of, oh, man, this guy's really good. And he was doing it against Travis Hunter. And, yeah, if you get him back, that's a big-time get. Marcus McKenzie runs it back. Therian Alexander, Trey Alexander, very excited about him. Jonathan Cabea, too, at nickel. And then you got Chika Ebenuha. Jaden Dunlap. Jaden Dunlap's a JUCO transfers, dealt with injuries. I think there's a potential for a nice senior send-off next year for Jaden Dunlap. So he's a name to watch, too. I think in a perfect world, you add one more cornerback to kind of just shore up the group. But what I always have to remind myself, too, is that it's tricky to add an upperclassman cornerback that you feel inspired by. Say, okay, he adds value to our room because we got film on him at the college level. But a guy that's an upperclassman probably wants to be given some assurances, and I don't know if you can clearly assure someone's going to step in and be the starter unless they are just an NFL-bound corner. I don't know if you can give that assurance with this cornerback unit that's very promising. And I think that's kind of one of the themes of this entire BYU football team in 2025 is, yes, there's some players that are position groups where you don't know how it's going to play out and really kind of a question mark going into the year, but the options are there. The optionality, is at the fingertips of these coaches to kind of then develop them, get these guys bought in to what the scheme is, the culture. And if you get that, man, it could be a really special group. And that's just, to me, a strength and sign of how the program is evolving and getting better. Look, I've followed BYU football for 30 years. My whole life, I've followed this program. And there are many quarterback units where it was about two guys, maybe one, and then everyone else is like, I don't know if they can be on the field at a D1 level. Those cornerbacks that I just mentioned, all those guys can play. Chika's more of a developmental guy, still more special teams guy. But the rest of that group, they can play. And they can contribute at a high level. And that's a nice situation to be in for a position that's viewed as an area of question going in, at this juncture of the offseason. I think it's a good spot for BYU to be in. Defensive line's going to be an area of question too. And similar to cornerback, I love the options though. And I think the potential there is pretty big. And I think it could be even greater than the group that we saw in 2024. Now, it was interesting, too. Earlier in the month, about a week or so ago, Kelly Papinga hopped on the KSL Sports Zone and said Logan Latui, they're going to have to replace him, Tyler Batty, Zay Banya, some of those seniors off the defensive end spot. But now there's, potential that Logan Latui could come back. It's reported in the Deseret News by it was in the Des News that he could be running it back. If you get Logan Latui back, that's huge. Because Latui, he had a sack in the Alamo Bowl, and he was really coming on. I mean, he was pushing Zay Banya to be the full-time starter at that defensive end spot. Kelly Papinga loves him. That would be huge for BYU to get an extra year for him. Now, how that works, that's still a question to me that I got to figure out. Because he was a 2017 guy at a Hunter High, served a mission. Weber State had the COVID year, had a redshirt year. There were some injuries at BYU, and that could always be the wiggle room opportunity because, 2023, it was plagued by injuries. And if you can maybe parlay a medical redshirt for 2023, that could be your avenue to maybe getting an extra year for Logan Latui. And we've seen so many times now with eligibility, and now we're getting to this 5 years of eligibility thing potentially. I think the NCAA does not want to get into any sort of lawsuit or just give them the waivers, basically. So that will be interesting to see if they can get Logan Latui back. But if they don't, there's still options. You look at some of the personnel on the defensive line. Obviously, Keanu Tanavasa. That's going to be huge, getting him into the fold from the defensive tackle position. You needed to shore up that D tackle spot. You bring back Bodie Schoonover, and I'm curious to see what Bodie becomes at BYU. You know, I was talking earlier about guys that haven't, factored in much. Is it Bodie Schoonover's time in 2025? Defensive end? Could he be a D tackle? We'll see. I mean, I think physically he transformed his body in 2024 to look like a Big 12 defensive end. I think he's primed and ready to take a step forward, but we'll see. Ephraim Asiana is an intriguing prospect. Tausilia Kana, Kini Laufonahema. I think what's interesting, too, is, just where do these guys line up? Do they end up playing them at D end? Do they play them at D tackle? Because there's a track record now with Jay Hill and the staff where they'll turn some of their big-body D ends, swing them into the interior like they did with John Nelson and Blake Mangelson. Do they do that with Viliami Buha, Asani Tuwala, Anisi Purcell, who played D end at Southern Utah? Do they do that with those guys? We'll see. John Taumai-Peu, he stepped in relief of Blake Mangelson in the Alamo Bowl before Blake came back in. I thought John Taumai-Peu, Snow College transfer, had a really big year for BYU. I thought he did a nice job coming off the bench. Josh Singh enters his senior year, and he's someone that he's got to factor into the two deep. I think Singh is someone that's a really nice player for BYU, and he's worked for everything he's earned. He's been around the program since 2021, never wavered. He stuck with it. I think he should be rewarded, not just because of clocking in, clocking out every day. I think he's also a pretty good football player. And I thought he did a nice job in that Alamo Bowl when he got opportunities for time, too. I'm curious to see how, BYU, factors in, some walk-ons, and there's going to be some cuts. We'll see probably after spring ball, and there's always going to be attrition, but, there's a lot of options here on the D-line. Some other players of note, young guys. Hunter Clegg comes in. Big-time potential with Hunter Clegg. Coming back from a mission. American Fork standout, initially signed with Utah. He flips to BYU. I had the chance to talk to him, and, he's bought into BYU. He feels like they're doing everything necessary from all facets to have a big-time program. Simone Davis comes back from a mission. He's back into the fold. We'll figure out all the RMs. There's guys like David Tangalano, and then you got some newcomers as well that are coming in. Kendall Wall, where does he line up? D end, D tackle. Vincent Tautua, Kalepi Finau Vete. Talatui Pututau is another RM that I'm curious to see. And then Luke Tuamalatai is a returning player. There's a lot of names, for this team. And there's other guys too. Orion Maile Kafusi. He was an underrated addition last year in spring ball as a preferred walk-on. Former Oregon State signee. Wouldn't be surprised if we see him and his name registering a little bit more next season. He's a name to keep an eye on for me, and he will only be a redshirt freshman for BYU next season. Carson Touge as well, Garrett Touge's son, another guy to monitor. He was someone that was suiting up on game days, dressing out. Curious to see what step forward he takes in his BYU career. Is he more of that guy that's kind of on the margins, the 105 when you're constructing that? Does he become someone that loses a spot? Again, it's all a puzzle piece to figuring this out with the 105-man roster. And then you also got Nualato Selison as well. Some positions of strength for BYU. Linebacker. Linebacker is stacked for BYU. Jack Kelly, Isaiah Glasker, Harrison Taggart. Those three form an incredible trio of talented linebackers. And you knew that those guys were going to be big time back in spring ball. Like, you saw the signs of that then. And, That's why when it was not really a big question about how do they fare at linebacker without some of the key guys that, Ben Bywater was a big loss, but they had the personnel in place. They already had tons of reps together with Taggart, Glasgow, and Kelly that they were just going to hit the ground running. And then you look at the rest of the depth chart. You got someone like a Naki Tuakoi at linebacker. Do they end up playing him as an edge? I mean, we'll see what they do with him. Ace Kafusi, Micah Kafusi. I thought Miles Hall took a big step forward. Che Bryant Strother, started out the season pretty strong, but, dealt with some injuries. I think he's going to be a really good player for BYU. Sialia Sarah navigated injuries. He redshirted this past year. He'll only be a redshirt sophomore coming up in 2025, and I thought he had a really good Alamo Bowl performance. Pearson Watson joins the program. Tyler Payne as a true freshman. That linebacker unit's stacked. I mean, that is the best unit on the team. I believe you also add Logan Payne as well. So much talent. You get Owen Borg back from a mission out of Corner Canyon. He could be someone that maybe you say, hey, get another year coming back from the mission, gray shirt, and then join the team in January. There's always those players that fall under that umbrella with BYU. Lutai Kinney as well. That position, though, so much talent, so much ability, really loaded, and it's probably the best linebacker unit in the Big 12. BYU stacked at that spot. I think another position of strength is safety. Tanner Wall comes back, Raider DeMooney, Falatau Satuala, Tommy Parasis, Preston Rex. He was at the bowl game, suited up. That's promising. Get him back because he suffered a season-ending injury. Matthias Leach, Jaron Kalama, the former wide receiver at Wasatch High School. He's a safety. You bring in Cannon DeVries from Weber High School. Koa Eldridge, Peyton Van Steesky. Good talent. I mean, Talon Alfrey as well. That position is stacked. And that's, again, where, losing Crew Wakely was unfortunate because he just was a dude. He was a baller. But I've consistently maintained this. And this is for the messaging from Jay Hill to reporters. He has said he wants an all Big 12 performer at safety. He hasn't got that yet. I think someone's bound to get to that in this group. I don't know if it's 2025. It might be 2026. We'll see. Someone in that grouping is going to get there, though. And I think that's the potential where maybe they got a little bit higher ceiling. And Tanner Wall and Raider DeMooney you probably start out with. And I'll be curious to see what you do with Falatau Satuala. Do you got to work him into the conversation too. And same with Tommy Parasis as well. I mean, they got a lot of options at that safety position. So BYU is in a good spot there. I think special teams is also in a great position. You can't ignore special teams. Getting Garrison Grimes as a long snapper, that's big. You lost Riggs. You lost Skidmore, who's going out on a mission. Will Farron, big game Bill, he takes over again for another year as the kicker. Dude was so clutch. That 54-yarder that he hit at the end of the first half against Colorado, it was so loud when it came off his foot. A booming kick. That guy has become automatic, so good. He's got a chance to become the greatest BYU kicker of all time. When you factor in the clutch kicks, the accuracy, he's been so good for BYU. Sam Vanderhaar returns as a punter. Landon Rico, Matthias Dunn as backups. Returning missionary Ian Sanchez as well. We'll see on roster numbers. Is he gray shirt? We'll see on that. And then Garrison Grimes, as I noted, Baylor transfer, Jeff Grimes' son, as the long snapper for BYU. And then return game, Parker Kingston, Keelan Marion, an All-American. Good place to be. Enoch Nawahine showed some stuff in the kick return game too, which also leads me to another position of strength. I think running back is an area of strength for BYU. LJ Martin leads the way for the Cougars at that spot. You've got Sione Moa, Enoch Nawahine, Jovesa DeMooney, Pokai Hunga, Kel Breslin, Lucky Finau. That's a really good group. Maybe you don't have the Aiden Robbins type. You don't have the Chris Brooks type. That's a new face, but LJ Martin's that dude. I think LJ Martin's going to be an NFL running back. He's well on his way to being one of the greats in BYU football history, but he's got to stay healthy, avoiding as much hits and keep him healthy at all costs this offseason because they need LJ to hit the ground running for 2025. Wide receiver is going to be a position of strength, I believe. Darius Lasser, everyone's waiting on his official decision. What's he going to do for next year? Does he come back, take advantage of the JUCO year, or go to the NFL or try to chase that? Chase Roberts returns, and that was unfortunate that Chase suffered an upper body injury in that Alamo Bowl. We'll see the timeline of how long it takes for him to get back, but you bring back Keelan Marion, Parker Kingston, JoJo Phillips, Cody Hagan, Dominique McKenzie, Tay Nakua, LaMason Waller joins the fold as a freshman. Yeah, there's talent there at wide receiver, no doubt about that. BYU's got plenty of that at the receiver position. Tight end's a little bit of a question mark. I think that's a spot where I just want to see how it performs. Yes, Carson Ryan's going to be the top guy. Who emerges at that top every down, threat in the receiving game? I loved what we saw from Reiner Swanson in the Alamo Bowl. Thought that would have been great to see throughout the entire year. Carson Ryan should be that for BYU in 2025. You've also got Ethan Erickson, Anthony Olsen, Nason Coleman, Noah Moiaki is someone that I'm really high on. Will Zundel, Matthew Frederick, Tucker Kelleher, Jacob Nye as well. There's options, kind of completely unproven. Might be the weakest group, or at least most unproven unit in the entire team outside of Carson Ryan. Everyone else is kind of a mystery as to what they would bring to the field for BYU. But that's a way too early look at the BYU football roster. I could keep going on and on. There will be many iterations of breaking down this personnel, breaking down the roster, breaking down the 105. It's coming. I'm going to have more in-depth breakdowns here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, but I thought this would be a nice tone setter for the offseason and get you a way too early look at some of the potential names, the positions for BYU football in 2025. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a ton, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. It's powered by KSLSports.com.